The new director called my critical regulatory work a luxury vacation and stripped my authority to save pennies. So, I let him take the wheel, knowing he was driving straight off a cliff. When the crash came, it cost them millions. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had started at the base of my skull around 4:00 a.m., the same time I had woken up to double-check the compliance addendums for the Berlin file. It was a throbbing, rhythmic reminder of my age and the sheer volume of cortisol pumping through my system, but I had ignored it. I had ignored the fatigue, the slightly blurred vision, and the fact that I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days. I ignored it all because the Berlin licensing renewal was the single most important event on our fiscal calendar. And I was the only one who knew how to navigate the labyrinth of German bureaucracy. I was sitting in the main conference room, nursing a lukewarm cup of water and praying the fluorescent lights would dim just a fraction, when Blake Sterling walked in. He didn't walk, he bounced. He possessed the terrifying, unearned confidence of a man who had read the summary of a management book, but skipped the chapters on actual leadership. He was 32, wore a suit that was too tight in the shoulders and too short at the ankles, and carried a laser pointer like it was a weapon of war. I had been prepared to present my itinerary. I had my binder, color-coded and tabbed. I had the breakdown of the new EU supply chain directives. I was ready to explain why face-to-face meetings with Bundesamt officials were not just a formality, but a survival tactic for our European operations. But I never got the chance to open my binder. "Let's talk about the elephant in the room, shall we?" Blake announced, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He clicked a button, and the projector screen behind him lit up with a slide titled Operational Fat Trimming. Underneath the title was a clip art image of a scissors cutting a dollar sign. And underneath that, in bold, red letters, Legacy Travel and Entertainment. "I've been reviewing the books," Blake said, pacing the front of the room. He spoke with a cadence that suggested he was auditioning for a tech startup documentary. "And I have to say, I'm shocked. We have people, senior people, treating regulatory compliance like a travel agency. We are not in the business of sending employees to Europe for croissants and compliments." The air left the room. It didn't just drift out, it was sucked away in a violent vacuum of shock. I froze. My hand, which had been reaching for my pen, stopped midair. I looked around the table. There were 15 other department heads present. Most of them had known me for 20 years. They knew I spent my vacations in Berlin arguing with customs officers in drafty warehouses and reviewing 300-page legal documents until my eyes bled. They went silent. No one looked at me. They stared at their notepads, at their phones, at the grain of the mahogany table, anywhere, but at the woman who was being publicly gutted. "Margaret," Blake said, turning his gaze on me. It wasn't a friendly acknowledgement, it was a target acquisition. "The annual Berlin trip, it's done. Cancelled. We're pivoting to digital-first communication. It's 2025. If you can't get it done over Zoom and DocuSign, it's not efficient." "Blake," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the sledgehammer pounding inside my head. "The Berlin renewal isn't a meeting you can do over Zoom. The regulators require physical verification of the original seals. It's in the statutes. If we don't go, we don't get the stamp. If we don't get the stamp, we don't ship." He chuckled. He actually chuckled, a dismissive, airy sound that made my skin crawl. "That's the old mindset, Margaret. That's the legacy thinking that's holding us back. I've already had Taylor look into it. It's a form. We fill it out, we email it, we pay the fee. Simple. We don't need to spend $8,000 so you can have a European holiday on the company dime." The accusation hung in the air, toxic and heavy. He wasn't just questioning my budget, he was questioning my integrity. He was erasing 2 decades of sacrifice, the missed anniversaries, the holidays spent in airport lounges, the sheer grit it took to keep this company legal in 27 countries, and reducing it to a greedy ploy for a free vacation. I felt the migraine spike, a white-hot lance of pain behind my right eye. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he didn't care about the statutes. He didn't care about the risk. He wanted a win. He wanted to show the board he had cut the fat, and I was the fat. "Okay," I whispered. "Excuse me," Blake asked, peeping a hand to his ear theatrically. I said okay, I repeated, louder this time. I closed my binder. The snap of the metal rings echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "If that is your directive, Blake, I will abide by it." The betrayal didn't feel like a stab in the back. It felt worse. It felt like watching your own house burn down while the arsonist stood there roasting marshmallows, telling you it was for your own good. The walk back to my cubicle felt like a funeral procession of one. The office was an open-plan nightmare of glass and brushed steel, designed to maximize collaboration, which mostly just meant there was nowhere to hide when you were falling apart. I could feel the eyes on me. The whispers started the moment I passed the break room. "Did you hear? Blake just totally shut Margaret down. No more Berlin trip, but she's been going since the 90s. I heard him say she was just doing it for the miles." I kept my chin high, my spine rigid. I refused to let them see the tremor in my hands. I reached my desk, a corner spot that I had earned through tenure, cluttered with framed certificates of compliance and a few photos of my cats, and sat down. The first thing I did was take 2 extra-strength Excedrin with a swig of cold coffee. The second thing I did was log into the travel portal. Cancel trip, Berlin, June 12/19. Reason, administrative directive. The screen flashed a warning, non-refundable deposit. Are you sure? I clicked yes, with a force that nearly cracked my mouse button. "Hey, Margaret." I spun my chair around. It was Sarah from accounting, a sweet girl who always brought in donuts on Fridays. She looked at me with pity, her head tilted to the side like I was a wounded animal she found on the roadside. I heard what happened in the sink," she murmured, leaning against my partition. "Are you okay? Blake can be a bit aggressive. He's just trying to make his mark, you know." "I'm fine, Sarah," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of glass. "New leadership, new strategies, we all have to adapt." "Right," she said, unconvinced. "But isn't that license really important? I remember last year you were stressed out for months about the customs coding." "It is important," I said, turning back to my screens. "But Blake has decided to streamline the process. He believes it can be handled by his executive assistant." Sarah's eyes went wide. Taylor just asked me yesterday how to convert a PDF to Word. She thinks Fiscal Year is a clothing brand." "She's young. She'll learn," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I wasn't protecting Taylor. I wasn't protecting Blake. I was engaging in the only form of warfare available to the powerless: silence. I opened my email client and drafted a new message. To Taylor CC, Blake Sterling subject, handover, Berlin licensing renewal materials. "Hi Taylor, per Blake's directive in this morning's meeting regarding the cessation of legacy travel and the delegation of administrative compliance tasks, I am forwarding you the Berlin files. Attached you will find the historic submission data, the regulator contact sheet, and the blank renewal forms. Please note, the deadline is June 17th. The German authorities are extremely strict regarding submission protocols. Please confirm receipt. Best, Margaret." I hit send. I watched the email move from the outbox to sent. It was a small action, insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe, but it felt like lighting a fuse. Blake wanted efficiency. I would give him efficiency. He wanted me to stop wasting time on complex relationships. Fine, I would stop. I looked at the calendar on my wall. June 17th was circled in red marker. I had circled it 6 months ago. It was the drop-dead date. In the world of international logistics, missing a regulatory deadline wasn't like turning in a late homework assignment. It was a nuclear event. It meant the immediate freezing of assets. It meant fines that accumulated by the hour. Blake thought he had humiliated me. He thought he had stripped me of my power. But he had forgotten one crucial thing, the one thing every seasoned professional knows. You never fire the person who knows the password to the bomb shelter. He thought compliance was just paperwork. He didn't know that the only reason our goods moved through the port of Hamburg was because I knew exactly which stamp Herr Muller liked on the T1 documents, and I knew to ask about his dachshund, Fritz. Blake had the title, he had the MBA, but I had the history. And as I minimized the window, I felt the cold, hard resolve settling in my chest, displacing the hurt. I wasn't going to warn him again. I wasn't going to fix this in the background like I always did. I was going to let it happen. To understand the magnitude of what Blake was destroying, you have to understand what I built. 20 years ago, this company was nothing but a regional distrib. Uter with grand ambitions and a chaotic shipping schedule. I was the one who flew to Europe when we were still flying coach on discount airlines with 3 layovers. I was the one who sat in the waiting rooms of the Bundesamt, the federal office, for 6 hours at a time, refusing to leave until I understood why our containers were being held. I missed my niece's high school graduation because of a surprise customs audit in Munich. I spent my 50th birthday in a hotel room in Frankfurt, eating room service schnitzel and reading new tariff codes, because a regulator had flagged a barcode error on a shipment of electronics worth $4 million. I fixed it. I always fixed it. I built a network of trust based on the simple, old-school principle that if Margaret Vance said the paperwork was correct, it was correct. That trust was the currency that allowed us to bypass the weeks-long inspection queues that choked our competitors. And then came Blake. Blake Sterling had been hired 4 weeks ago to modernize the operations department. He came from a tech background, some app that delivered artisan water or something equally useless, and he treated our logistics company like it was software code. He believed anything could be hacked, optimized, or disrupted. He walked through the office like he was inspecting a zoo. He would stop at desks, squinting at people's monitors, and ask questions like, "Is this workflow scalable?" Or, "How does this task leverage our core synergy?" He was handsome in a generic, AI-generated sort of way. Perfect teeth, expensive haircut, and eyes that were constantly scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. He didn't view employees as people. He viewed us as headcount and legacy costs. I remember our first one-on-one meeting. He hadn't asked me about my team or my challenges. He had asked me why I had so many physical binders in my office. "We need to digitize, Margaret," he had said, looking at my shelves with disdain. "Paper is the anchor that drowns innovation." "These are original affidavits," I had explained. "Legally, we are required to keep hard copies for 7 years." He had just rolled his eyes. "We'll see about that. I'm bringing in a consultant to review our retention policies. We need to cut the fat, not the firepower." Cut the fat, not the firepower. It was his mantra. He had it printed on posters. He ended every email with it. Now, sitting in the aftermath of the meeting, I saw him walking toward my desk with Taylor trailing behind him. Taylor was 24, a sweet girl who was drowning in her role. She spent more time curating her Instagram stories than managing Blake's calendar. She was holding a large, insulated tumbler and looking terrified. "Margaret," Blake said, stopping at the edge of my cubicle. He didn't sit, he loomed. "I saw your email. Good initiative on the handover." "Thank you, Blake," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I just want to make sure we're on the same page here," he said, leaning in, his cologne, something musky and expensive, wafting over the partition. "I know you're attached to these old ways of doing things, but Taylor here is a digital native. She's going to automate this whole Berlin thing. We're going to show the board that we don't need to wine and dine bureaucrats to get business done." He looked at me with a smirk that was half pity, half contempt. It was the look you give a rotary phone or a VHS player. "I'm sure Taylor is very capable," I said. I looked at Taylor. "The files are in your inbox. The deadline is June 17th. Do not miss it." Taylor nodded frantically. "Got it, June 17th. Totally. I'll put a reminder in Slack." "Great," Blake said, straightening up and clapping his hands together. "See? Seamless. Oh, and Margaret, since you have all this free time now that you're not jet-setting across the Atlantic, I'm going to need you to audit the janitorial supply usage. I think we're spending too much on paper towels." He didn't wait for an answer. He spun on his heel and marched away, Taylor scrambling to keep up. I stared at his retreating back. He had just assigned a senior compliance manager to count toilet paper rolls. It was the final insult. The bridge wasn't just burned, he had nuked the foundations. I turned back to my computer. I didn't open the janitorial spreadsheet. Instead, I opened a new folder on my personal drive. I named it the receipts. I started dragging files into it, every email where he called my work a vacation, the meeting invite where he excluded me from the regulatory planning session, the directive he had just given me. He thought I was expired. He thought I was a relic. He didn't realize that relics are made of stone, and stone survives the fire. I looked at the calendar again, June 17th. Tick-tock. The weeks following the reorganization of the compliance department were a study in corporate absurdity. While Blake hosted Innovation Happy Hour and plastered the break room with posters that read "Disrupt or Die," I was relegated to the supply closet. He hadn't been joking about the janitorial audit. My task, my sole official project as a senior manager with 20 years of tenure, was to create a spreadsheet tracking the consumption rate of paper towels, hand soap, and breakroom coffee pods. I did it. I did it with the same meticulous attention to detail I had once applied to international trade treaties. I counted the rolls. I calculated the average milliliters of soap used per employee per day. I created pivot tables analyzing the correlation between Bagel Fridays and increased napkin usage. But while my left hand was counting toilet paper, my right hand was building a fortress. I knew Blake. I had seen men like him before, usually at airport bars, bragging about their startups while their credit cards were being declined. He was all surface area, no depth. He assumed that because he had delegated the Berlin license to Taylor, it was done. He assumed that compliance was a checkbox, a static event that happened once and was forgotten. He didn't know that the Bundesamt required weekly status checks during the renewal window. He didn't know about the supplementary tax filings that had to be cross-referenced with the license application. And Taylor, poor overwhelmed Taylor, was drowning. I walked past her desk on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before the deadline. She was buried under a pile of invoices, her monitor covered in sticky notes. She was on the phone, her voice pitching high with stress. "I don't know what a VAT registration number is," she was saying, twirling a strand of hair nervously. "Can't we just use the company credit card?" I paused. The sheer horror of that sentence nearly made me stop. Using a corporate credit card for a government excise tax payment would trigger an immediate audit. It was the equivalent of trying to pay your mortgage with monopoly money. I wanted to step in. The instinct to fix, to educate, to save the ship was so deeply ingrained in my DNA that my muscles actually tensed, ready to intervene. But then I looked up. Blake was standing in his glass-walled office, laughing into a headset, feet propped up on his desk. He looked out, saw me standing near Taylor, and his expression hardened. He tapped his watch and pointed toward the supply closet. "Back to your box, Margaret." The tension in my muscles released. I exhaled. "Good luck, Taylor," I whispered and kept walking. That afternoon, I initiated the Shadow Archive. I couldn't trust the company's servers. Blake had administrative access. He could delete emails, wipe calendars, and alter logs. If this went south, and it was going south, he would look for a scapegoat. He would try to claim I never sent the files or that I had sabotaged the handover. So I brought in my own equipment. A high-capacity, encrypted external hard drive, the size of a deck of cards, which I kept hidden in the false bottom of my purse. I started forwarding everything. Item 1, the delegation email. Blake's original directive stripping me of the Berlin account. Item 2, the handover. My email to Taylor with all the files attached, time-stamped and read receipt confirmed. Item 3, the exclusion. A series of meeting invites for Q3 European strategy, where my name was conspicuously absent from the attendee list. Item 4, the warnings. I found 3 automated notifications from the German regulatory portal sent to the General Compliance inbox, which I still had read-only access to. Subject: action required 14 days to expiration. Subject: action required 7 days to expiration. Subject: urgent missing documents. Taylor had opened them. I could see the status change from unread to read. And then, she had moved them to a folder labeled to do later. I took screenshots. I saved the logs showing who opened the emails and when. I downloaded the metadata. I felt like a spy in my own home. It was a strange, cold sensation. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot. Anger burns. This was ice. This was the clinical detachment of a coroner determining the cause of death before the patient had even died. Margaret, Blake's voice boomed across the quiet office one afternoon. Status on the SOAP metrics. I turned slowly. He was standing there with a few of the junior sales guys, clearly trying to perform for an audience. The report is finished, Blake, I said, sliding a printed document across my desk. We are currently over-indexing on 2-ply in the executive washroom. I recommend a switch to single-ply to align with your cut the fat initiative. The sales guys snickered. Blake's smile faltered for a microsecond before he recovered. Great, thrilling stuff, Margaret. See? Everyone contributes. He grabbed the report and tossed it onto a stack of unread mail without looking at it. By the way, Taylor tells me the Berlin thing is under control. She said the portal is user-friend. Lie, guess we didn't need those 2 weeks in Europe after all. I'm glad to hear it, I said. German efficiency is legendary. Exactly, he beamed, missing the irony entirely. We're saving the company a fortune. You'll thank me when the profit-sharing checks come out. I'm sure I will, I said. I turned back to my screen. The date in the corner read June 16th. Tomorrow was the deadline. The bomb was primed, and Blake was standing right on top of it, dancing. June 17th passed with a terrifying silence. I wore my favorite navy blazer that day. I arrived at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I made my tea. I sat at my desk. I watched Taylor. She was busy planning the office summer solstice party, scrolling through Pinterest for tiki bar ideas. She didn't log into the German portal. She didn't print a confirmation certificate. She didn't run to the scanner. The business day in Berlin closed at 11:00 a.m. our time. At 11:01 a.m., I took a sip of my Earl Grey. It was done. The license had lapsed. Technically, at that exact moment, every truck we had on the road in Germany was operating illegally. Every warehouse storing our goods was now a black market facility in the eyes of the law. I waited for the alarms. I waited for the phone calls. But nothing happened. That's the insidious thing about bureaucracy. It doesn't explode like a movie special effect. It's a silent poison. The systems don't shut down immediately. The notifications take time to propagate through the servers. The fines, however, start the second the clock strikes. Wednesday, June 18th, still quiet. Thursday, June 19th, nothing. Blake was walking on air. He had just presented his quarterly savings projection to the CFO, bragging about the $8,000 saved on travel. Then came Friday, June 20th. It started with a frown. I was watching Jason, the logistics manager for European freight. He was sitting 3 rows away. He typed something, paused, frowned, and hit refresh. He typed again. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, listened, and hung up. He stood up and walked over to the IT help desk. "Hey," Jason said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the office. "Is the VPN down for Germany? I can't get into the Hamburg customs interface." "VPN is green," the IT guy replied, not looking up from his sandwich. "Try clearing your cache." I did. It's giving me an error 403, forbidden. My heart did a slow, heavy thump. Error 403, access denied. Jason walked back to his desk. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. He answered it, and his face went the color of ash. "What do you mean impounded?" he asked. The office grew quieter. "No, that can't be right. The paperwork is. Hang on." He put the phone on mute and stood up, scanning the room frantically. His eyes landed on Blake's glass office. He sprinted. I watched through the glass. Jason was gesturing wildly. Blake looked annoyed, then confused. He waved a hand dismissively. Jason pointed at the phone. Blake finally picked up his own receiver. I saw the moment Blake heard the news. His posture changed. The arrogant lean disappeared. He sat up straight. He swiveled his chair toward his computer and started typing furiously. A moment later, he stormed out of his office, Jason trailing behind him like a nervous puppy. "Taylor," Blake barked. Taylor jumped, spilling a little bit of her iced latte. "Yeah, what's up?" "The Berlin license," Blake said, his voice tight. "Did you get the confirmation code?" "The what?" Taylor blinked. "Oh, the renewal thing. Yeah, I submitted the form like last week." "Where is the confirmation?" Blake demanded. "Customs is saying our license number is invalid." I think it's in my email." Taylor started clicking around, her face scrunching up. "I sent the PDF. It said received." "That means it's good, right?" "Find it now," Blake hissed. He turned and saw me. I was watching him. I wasn't hiding it. I was staring directly at him, my face a mask of calm curiosity. He marched over to my desk. "Margaret," he said, and for the first time there was a tremor in his voice. "We're having a glitch with the German portal. Jason says a truck has been stopped. I need you to log in and override it." I looked at him. I folded my hands on my desk. "I can't do that, Blake," I said softly. "What do you mean you can't? You're the senior compliance manager." I corrected. "I am currently the janitorial supply auditor, and more importantly, you revoked my credentials." What? "On March 15th, I said, reciting the date from memory. "You instructed it to remove my administrative access to all external regulatory portals. You said it was a security risk to have legacy users with active keys. I literally cannot log in. My username doesn't exist." Blake stared at me, his mouth opened and closed. "Well, call them, call your contact, that guy, Mueller, call him and tell him it's a mistake." "I can't do that either," I said. "Herr Mueller retired 3 THS ago. The new contact is a Frau Schneider. I've never met her, because I didn't go to Berlin." "Margaret, this isn't a game," he snapped, his face flushing red. "Fix this." "I am not playing a game, Blake," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming hard as granite. "I am following your protocol. You delegated this task. You explicitly forbade me from interfering. If I make a call now, representing a department I no longer lead, on a license I didn't renew, I would be committing fraud. Is that what you're asking me to do?" He recoiled. He looked at the phone in Jason's hand, then at Taylor, who was now crying softly at her desk, and finally back at me. "Fine," he spat. "I'll handle it myself." He stormed back to his office and slammed the door. I watched him pick up the phone. I knew exactly what was happening. He was calling the General Inquiries line for the German Federal Office. He would get an automated menu. In German. He didn't speak German. I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. By Monday morning, the glitch was a full-blown catastrophe. The weekend had been a bloodbath. I knew this because although I wasn't checking my work email, the news has a way of traveling. Germany operates on Central European time, 6 hours ahead of us. By the time Blake walked in on Monday, the German authorities had been awake for half the day, and they were not happy. The office atmosphere was funeral. The silence was thick, punctuated only by frantic typing and hushed, panicked whispers. "Total freeze," I heard the VP of sales whispering by the water cooler. "Amazon Europe just delisted our entire catalog because we can't guarantee delivery dates." "How much?" someone asked. $2 million a week in lost revenue. And that's just sales. The fines? God, I heard the fines are retroactive. I sat at my desk, updating my SOAP spreadsheet. Around 10:00 a.m., the summons came. "Margaret," Blake's voice was ragged. He looked like he hadn't slept in 72 hours. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "Conference room, now." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and grabbed my purse, the one with the encrypted drive in the hidden pocket. The conference room was full. The CEO, Mr. Henderson, was there, the general counsel, Linda, the CFO, and Blake. Mr. Henderson looked grim. He was a fair man, but he was a numbers man, and right now, the numbers were bleeding. "Sit down, Margaret," Mr. Henderson said. I sat. "We have a situation," Henderson began, his voice gravelly. "Our European operating license has expired. The German government has flagged our entire corporation as non-compliant. We have 3 containers of perishable goods sitting in a hot warehouse in Hamburg, and we are accruing fines of 100,000 euros per day." He paused, letting the number hang in the air. "Blake tells me," Henderson continued, looking at his director of operations, "that this was a failure of the transition process. He claims that you, Margaret, failed to provide the necessary access codes and historical data to Taylor during the handover." My eyes snapped to Blake. He was looking at the table, his jaw clenched, refusing to meet my gaze. He was going for it. He was trying to frame me. "He says," Linda, the general counsel, added, checking her notes, "that you were uncooperative and withheld critical contact information in an attempt to sabotage the new management." "Is this true, Margaret?" Henderson asked. I didn't answer immediately. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small silver drive. I placed it on the table. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice calm, clear, and ringing with absolute authority. "I have worked for this company for 20 years. I have never missed a deadline. I have never failed an audit." "That's history, Margaret," Blake snapped, finding his voice. "We're talking about now. You set Taylor up to fail. You knew she didn't understand the complexity." "I knew," I cut him off, my voice sharp as a whip. "I knew she didn't understand, which is why I sent this." I plugged the drive into the conference room laptop. The screen flickered to life. I opened the folder labeled the RECPTS. "Document A," I said, clicking a file. It projected onto the wall behind Blake, the same wall where he had mocked me a month ago. It was the email. From Margaret Vance to Taylor Blake Sterling, date March 15th, subject handover, Berlin licensing renewal materials, content. Attached you will find the historic submission data, the regulator contact sheet. Please note, the deadline is June 17th. Please confirm receipt. I sent her everything, I said. Templates, contacts, previous filings, and I CC'd Blake. Blake shifted in his seat. "Okay, so you sent an email. That doesn't mean you helped her." "Document B," I continued, clicking the next file. It was a screenshot of a Slack conversation. "Margaret, Taylor, do you have questions on the Berlin file? The deadline is approaching." "Taylor, Blake said not to bother you with legacy stuff. We got this." Blake replying to thread, "Margaret, focus on the janitorial audit. Leave the international strategy to us." The room went silent. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "You told her to leave it alone," Henderson asked Blake. I meant she shouldn't micromanage," Blake stammered. "Document C," I said, "the IT ticket logs." I pulled up the system record. Ticket 4992, remove Margaret Vance from Global Regulatory Admin Group. Requested by Blake Sterling. Priority, Hi. You removed my access, I said, turning to Blake. You physically prevented me from checking the status of the renewal. If I had tried to log in last week to save us, I would have been blocked. You built the wall, Blake. You just didn't realize you were walling yourself in. The general counsel, Linda, was reading the screen with a look of horror. Blake, did you really revoke a senior compliance officer's access to the compliance portal? It was a security measure, Blake yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. We were streamlining. And finally, I said, delivering the coup de grace, Document D. I opened a PDF. It was the warning letter from the Bundesamt, dated 2 weeks ago. This was sent to the general inbox, I explained. Taylor opened it on June 2nd. She moved it to a folder called MISC. It explicitly states, failure to renew by June 17th will result in immediate cessation of trade privileges. I sat back. I didn't sabotage anything, Mr. Henderson. I simply obeyed orders. I was told my methods were expensive and outdated. I was told my trips were vacations. I was told to step back, so I did. The failure isn't that I didn't do my job. The failure is that Blake thought my job was easy. Mr. Henderson looked at the screen. Then he looked at Blake. The look wasn't angry. It was something far worse. It was the look of a man realizing he had hired a fraud. Blake, Henderson said quietly, please explain to me why we are currently losing 100,000 euros a day because you wanted to save $8,000 on a plane ticket. Blake opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish on a dock, gasping, flopping, and entirely out of his element. Blake choked. I can fix it, I just need. You can't fix it, I said, because you don't know the password. Everyone looked at me. The Bundesamt emergency reset protocol, I said. It requires a master key code that was issued physically in Berlin 5 years ago. It's not on the server. It's not in the cloud. Where is it? Henderson asked, desperation creeping into his voice. It's in my head, I said, and partly in a safe deposit box in a bank in Kreuzberg, Berlin, which requires a biometric scan of my fingerprint to open. The silence that followed was absolute. Blake slumped in his chair. He knew, he finally truly knew, he hadn't just lost a license. He had handed me the gun, loaded it, and aimed it at his own career. And I hadn't even pulled the trigger. I just watched him do it. The silence in the boardroom following my declaration was absolute. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the heavy, suffocating vacuum that occurs when a high-velocity train of thought slams into an immovable wall of reality. A biometric scan, Blake whispered. His voice was thin, reedy, stripped of all its corporate bravado. You lock the company's future behind a fingerprint. No, Blake, I said, leaning back in my chair, allowing myself the luxury of a small, cold smile. I secured the company's future behind a protocol you deemed legacy waste. The bank in Kreuzberg holds the physical master seal and the encryption key for the Bundesamt portal. We set it up that way in 2018 to prevent cyberattacks. It requires physical presence. It requires me. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, looked as though he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. He slowly turned his head toward his director of operations. The vein in Henderson's temple was throbbing, a visible metronome of his rising fury. Let me understand this, Henderson said, his voice dangerously low. You fired the only person who can access the vault. You canceled the trip that allows us to access the vault. And then you lied to this board about the redundancy of that trip. I didn't know about the bank box, Blake stammered, his hands fluttering over his laptop as if looking for an undo button for real life. She never told me. It wasn't in the documentation. It was in the critical assets binder, I interjected smoothly. The red one, the one you told Taylor to throw in the shredder because, and I quote, binders are for dinosaurs. Henderson closed his eyes. He took a deep breath through his nose. When he opened them, the look he gave Blake was devoid of warmth, devoid of mentorship, devoid of anything but cold calculation. Blake, Henderson said, Leave. S. We can pivot, Blake tried, desperate now. I can get a team of hackers. We can brute force they. Get out. Henderson slammed his hand on the mahogany table, the sound cracking like a pistol shot. You are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Leave your badge with security. Do not return to your desk. We will mail you your personal effects. But... Now, Henderson roared. Blake flinched. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, a jagged, ugly sound. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, for someone to nod and say, "It's okay, buddy." But there were no allies. There was only the general counsel taking furious notes and the CFO staring at the ceiling. Blake Sterling, the disruptor, the innovator, the man who was going to modernize us into the stratosphere, shuffled to the door. He didn't strut. He didn't bounce. He walked with the heavy, leaden steps of a man carrying his own severance package. The door clicked shut behind him. The room exhaled. Mr. Henderson turned to me. The transformation was instant. The rage vanished, replaced by a desperate, pleading warmth. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together like a penitent sinner. "Margaret," he said, his voice soft. I apologize. On behalf of the board, on behalf of the company, we were misled. We were dazzled by buzzwords and we lost sight of the operational bedrock you built." I didn't say anything, I just watched him. "We need you to go to Berlin," he continued, urgency creeping in. "Tonight, I'll have the travel coordinator book the next flight, business class. Hell, private, if we can find a jet. You fly out, you go to the bank, you get the key, you meet Frau Schneider, and you fix this. We can probably get the fines reduced if we show good faith." He looked at the CFO. "Bob, authorize an immediate bonus for Margaret. 20%? No, 50% of her annual salary, effective immediately." "Done," the CFO said, typing rapidly. "There," Henderson said, smiling weakly at me. "You're the hero, Margaret. You save the day, you get a massive bonus, and you get your department back. We'll hire you a new team. Anyone you want." It was a generous offer. 6 months ago, it would have been my dream. 6 months ago, I would have been grateful for the recognition. But 6 months ago, I hadn't spent 12 weeks counting toilet paper rolls. 6 months ago, I hadn't been humiliated in front of my peers. 6 months ago, I hadn't watched them cheer as they dismantled my life's work to save $8,000. I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out a pen. I didn't pull out a notepad. I pulled out a cream-colored envelope, sealed with wax. I had prepared it weeks ago, on the day Blake told me to audit the soap. I slid it across the table. It stopped perfectly in front of Mr. Henderson. "What is this?" he asked, freezing. "My resignation," I said, "effective immediately." "Margaret, no," Henderson said, his face paling. "You can't, we're bleeding. You're the only one who can stop it." "I am," I agreed. "And that is a very expensive position to be in, Mr. Henderson. But the thing about legacy employees is that eventually we become history. You wanted to cut the fat. You wanted to modernize. You wanted to move on from the past." I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. "I am giving you exactly what you asked for. I am removing the legacy cost." "Margaret, please," Henderson stood up, reaching out a hand. "Name your price, double the salary, triple, whatever you want." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt lighter. The weight of the deadlines, the pressure of the audits, the constant need to prove my worth to people who didn't understand it all evaporated. "My price," I said quietly, "was respect, and that is a currency you cannot print more of once you've spent it all." "But the fines," the CFO gasped. 2 million euros. Margaret, if you walk out that door, we might miss the quarterly earnings. The stock will tank." "Then I suggest," I said, "that you ask Taylor to Google how to break into a German bank vault. I hear she's very good at digital solutions." I turned and walked toward the door. "Margaret," Henderson shouted, his voice cracking, "you can't just leave us like this." I paused with my hand on the handle. I looked back at the room of powerful men in expensive suits, terrified by a piece of paper and a missing stamp. "I'm not leaving you like this," I said. "I'm leaving you exactly where Blake put you. I'm just refusing to be the one who digs you out." I opened the door and walked out. The walk back to my desk was the longest and shortest walk of my life. The office was buzzing with the chaotic energy of a hive that had just been kicked. People were running between cubicles. Phones were ringing unanswered. I saw Blake. He was at his desk, dumping things into a cardboard box. He held that stupid mug, Innovate or Evaporate, in his hand. For a moment, staring at it, before tossing it into the trash can. It shattered with a satisfying crunch. He looked up and saw me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face puffy. He opened his mouth, perhaps to curse me, perhaps to beg, but I didn't slow down. I walked past him like he was a piece of office furniture slated for removal. I didn't even blink. I reached my desk. I didn't pack much. I took the photo of my cats. I took my favorite fountain pen. I took the small, potted succulent that had somehow survived the fluorescent drought. And I took the USB drive, labeled personal insurance. Sarah from accounting came up to me, her eyes wide. "Margaret, I saw Blake leave with security. What's happening? Are you taking over?" I smiled at her, a genuine, warm smile. "No, Sarah, I'm moving on." "But where are you going?" "Berlin," I said. "For the license." "No," I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. "For the strudel." I walked to the elevator. I pressed the down button. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and pressed lobby. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the frantic, panic-stricken office, I took a deep breath. The air in the lobby tasted different. It tasted like freedom. I took a cab straight to the airport. I didn't go home first. My bags were already packed. They had been in the trunk of my car for 3 days. I had known. I had always known this moment was coming. At the ticket counter, the agent looked at my passport. "Destination." "Berlin," I said. "We have a seat in economy, or for an upgrade fee, we have." "First class," I interrupted. "One way." I handed her my personal credit card. It had a high limit. And honestly, after 20 years of unspent vacation days and stockpiled savings, I could afford to buy the whole plane if I wanted to. The flight was smooth. I drank champagne from a crystal flute. I ate warm nuts. I watched a movie about a heist and rooted for the thief. When I landed in Berlin, it was raining. A soft, gray European drizzle that smelled of wet pavement and old stone. It felt like coming home. I took a taxi to the hotel I always stayed at, the one Blake had called a luxury junket. It wasn't luxury. It was historic. The concierge dieter recognized me immediately. "Frau Vance," he beamed, rushing out to take my bag. "We were not expecting you this year. We heard the, budget cuts." "The budget cuts have been rescinded, dieter," I said, tipping him €50. "But this is a private visit." Of course. The usual room, the one with the view of the spree." "Please." That evening, I sat on the balcony of my room, wrapped in a thick hotel robe, watching the river flow by. My phone was buzzing on the table. It had been buzzing for hours. 12 missed calls from Mr. Henderson, 8 missed calls from Linda, 3 voicemails from the CFO. I picked up the phone. I didn't unlock it. I just looked at the notifications. Text from Henderson: "Margaret, please. We are authorized to offer you a consulting contract. $500 hour. Just tell us the code." Text from Henderson: $1,000 hour. Margaret. Text from Henderson: "The regulators are threatening to revoke the license permanently. Please." I took a sip of the Riesling I had ordered from room service. It was crisp, dry, and perfect. I thought about the code. I thought about the safe deposit box in Kreuzberg. It was sitting there, waiting. All it needed was my thumbprint. I could go there tomorrow. I could walk in, retrieve the key, log into the portal, and save them. I could earn more in one day than I used to make in a month. I could be the savior. But then I remembered Blake's smirk. I remembered the fat trimming slide. I remembered the silence of the room when I was humiliated. I remembered the toilet paper spreadsheet. I knew, eventually, I might help them. I was a professional, after all, and there were innocent people like Sarah whose jobs were at risk. I would probably negotiate a contract that would fund my retirement 5 times over. I would probably send them the code in a week or two, once the stock price had dipped enough to teach the board a lesson they would feel in their bones. But not today. And certainly not tomorrow. Tomorrow, I was going to sleep in. Then, I was going to walk to the cafe on the corner, the one with the grumpy owner who made the best pastries in the city. I was going to sit there for 3 hours, reading a book, eating a croissant, and watching the people of Berlin rush to work. I picked up my phone one last time. I opened the text thread with Henderson. I typed a single reply. My consultation rate is $5,000 per hour, with a 40-hour minimum retainer, payable in advance. My earliest availability to begin discussions is next Monday. Until then, I am on vacation. I hit send. Then I turned the phone off. I looked out at the city lights reflecting on the dark water. Somewhere in a server farm, a license was expired. Somewhere in America, a board room was in chaos. Somewhere, Blake Sterling was explaining to his wife why he was unemployed. But here, on this balcony, everything was compliant. Everything was in order. I raised my glass to the empty air. Prost, I whispered. And for the first time in 20 years, I truly enjoyed my trip to Berlin.